The Grand Hall of the Galactic Council buzzed with excitement. Hundreds of alien representatives filled the massive chamber, their voices echoing off the crystal walls. Today's meeting was special. A new spacefaring race had been discovered. Lord High Commander Dax of the Arkan Empire stood at the central podium, his massive frame towering over the holographic display. His scaled skin reflected the blue light as he gestured at the projected images. These scans were taken at the edge of Section 7, he announced, his deep voice carrying across the chamber. They show a fleet of vessels belonging to a species calling themselves humans. Laughter rippled through the assembly. The images showed ships that seemed absurdly small compared to the standard vessels used by most spacefaring races. While the average Arkan battlecruiser stretched nearly 2 kilometers in length, these human ships barely reached 300 meters. "Surely this is a scouting fleet?" asked one of the council members, wiping tears of amusement from their 4 eyes. "Their actual warships must be larger." Dax shook his head, his neck frills expanding in apparent amusement. "No, these are their main combat vessels. Their largest ship, what they call a carrier, is still less than half the size of our smallest support craft." More laughter filled the chamber. Some representatives were practically falling out of their seats. The idea that any species would try to explore space in such tiny ships seemed ridiculous to them. How do they even fit their weapon systems in such small frames? Another council member called out. "What do they use for defense? Pointed sticks." The chamber erupted in fresh waves of laughter. But not everyone was amused. In the upper observation gallery, Ambassador James Reed watched quietly. He had arrived early and chosen to observe the reaction to humanity's introduction, rather than immediately announcing his presence. Reed was a tall man by human standards, though he barely reached the shoulder of even the smallest alien species present. His gray hair and weathered face spoke of decades of diplomatic service, and his eyes held a patience born from long experience. As the laughter continued below, Reed noticed something interesting. While most of the council members joined in the mockery, a few of the older representatives remained silent. These veterans of space politics watched the images with more calculating eyes, perhaps remembering other times when new species had been underestimated. Dax continued his presentation, displaying more scans of the human fleet. "They have requested trading rights and diplomatic recognition," he announced, his tone dripping with condescension. "While we usually require more impressive credentials, I suppose we should humor them. After all, even children must learn to walk before they can run." Reed checked his watch. The time had come. He straightened his uniform and walked to the lift that would take him to the council floor. As the platform descended, the laughter began to die down. All eyes turned to this small figure who had suddenly appeared among them. "Greetings, honored representatives," Reed's clear voice carried across the now silent chamber. "I am Ambassador James Reed of Earth. I appreciate your entertaining response to our fleet specifications." The council members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Being caught mocking the species representatives to their face was considered poor form, even by their standards. But Reed simply smiled. "I look forward to working with all of you, though I must point out one small error in Lord Commander Dax's presentation." He paused, letting the tension build. "Those scans you showed, they weren't of our main fleet. Those were our mining and exploration vessels." A murmur ran through the chamber. Reed's smile never wavered as he took his assigned seat, leaving the council members to wonder what they had missed. In the back of the chamber, one of the veteran representatives nodded slowly, a knowing look in their ancient eyes. Sometimes, the smallest packages contained the biggest surprises. Humanity was about to teach the galaxy that very lesson. 3 months after Earth's introduction to the Galactic Council, the situation at the border worlds had grown tense. The Arkan Empire's massive ships patrolled with increasing aggression, their shadows casting darkness over peaceful trading ports. Ambassador Reed sat in his modest office aboard the human diplomatic station. The room was small by alien standards, but he had grown used to the surprised looks visitors gave when they ducked through the doorway. Today's news reports scrolled across his screen, none of them good. Another trade ship stopped and searched. He muttered, making notes. The Archons claimed they were looking for weapons smugglers, but their real message was clear: bow to our power. A soft chime announced a visitor. Captain Tom Baker of the Earth ship Swift entered, his uniform neat but showing signs of a long journey. "Ambassador, you needed to see me." "Yes, Tom. Have a seat." Reed gestured to the chair across from his desk. "Tell me about your latest patrol." Baker's weathered face grew serious. "The Archons are getting bolder. Yesterday, they demanded tribute from the ring colonies, food, metals, and fuel. Said it was a protection fee." Reed nodded slowly. The ring colonies were peaceful settlements, barely able to defend themselves. "And what did our ships do?" "Followed orders, sir. We stayed quiet, kept our distance, recorded everything." Baker's fingers drummed on the armrest, though it wasn't easy watching those bullies throw their weight around. Reed pulled up a star map on the wall display. Red dots marked recent Archon inspections. There were many, but what interested him were the small blue markers showing positions of Earth's ships. To most observers, they seemed randomly placed. They weren't. "The Council still won't act," Reed said. "They're too afraid of the Archon fleet. Did you see their new dreadnought? 2.5 kilometers of arrogance." Baker smiled slightly. "Yeah, we saw it. Looks pretty in the sunlight. Very big." Both men shared a knowing look. Size had its advantages, but it had weaknesses too. Humanity had learned that lesson long ago. The door chimed again. This time it was Lieutenant Maria Wells, their intelligence officer. Her usual calm expression was troubled. "Sir, we have a problem. The Archons just seized a medical transport heading to the outer colonies. They're claiming it was carrying military supplies." Reed's face darkened. "Were there patients aboard?" "Yes, sir, including children." The room grew very quiet. Baker's hands gripped his chair's armrests until his knuckles turned white. Even Reed's diplomatic mask cracked slightly. "Send the footage to my terminal," Reed ordered. "I'll bring it up at tomorrow's council meeting." He paused, then added, "And send word to Fleet Command. Tell them to move to position Delta." Maria's eyes widened slightly, but she nodded and left. Baker looked at Reed questioningly. "Sir, Delta puts our ships awfully close to those trade routes the Archons are harassing." Reed turned back to his star map. The blue dots were forming a pattern now, one that would have been obvious if anyone had bothered to look closely. But the Archons were too busy laughing at Earth's tiny ships to notice. "The Archons think size equals strength," Reed said quietly. "They see our smaller ships and assume we're weak. They never stop to ask why we build them that way." Baker stood up, straightening his uniform. "Should I tell the fleet to expect trouble?" "Tell them to stay calm and follow protocols," Reed replied. "But yes, they should be ready. The Archons are bullies, and bullies eventually push too far." As Baker left, Reed studied the medical transport's footage. The Archon ships loomed over it like giants, their massive weapons trained on the helpless vessel. They looked powerful, unstoppable. But Earth had faced bullies before, and humanity had learned long ago that the bigger they were, the harder they fell. In the darkness of space, Earth's tiny fleet waited quietly. The galaxy was about to learn why size wasn't everything. The attack came at dawn, station time. 3 peaceful worlds, the ring colonies, woke to find massive Archon warships filling their skies. Their huge shapes blocked out the stars, casting shadows over the terrified colonies below. In the Galactic Council chamber, the emergency alarms flashed red. Ambassador Reed watched the live feeds with a grim expression. The Archon ships were positioning themselves around major population centers, their weapon ports open. Lord Commander Dax stood proudly at the podium. "The ring colonies have been harboring criminals and smugglers," he announced. "The Archon Empire is merely establishing order. There are 10 million civilians on those worlds," Reed said, his voice cutting through the panicked murmurs, "including 2 million children." Dax's neck frills expanded in a gesture of dismissal. Then they should surrender quickly. He turned to the other council members. Unless someone wishes to stop us. The chamber fell silent. Everyone knew what he meant. The Arkan fleet was the largest in the galaxy. Their smallest warship was bigger than most species' largest vessels. Who could stand against them? That's when the first distress call came in. Emergency, emergency. The voice crackled over the council's speakers. Ring Colony 3 under attack. Orbital stations. They're shooting the orbital stations. The chamber's main screen lit up with footage. Massive Arkan ships fired their main guns, destroying defensive platforms and communication arrays. Their huge cannons could split a small moon in half. Against civilian stations, they were overkill. Reed touched his communicator. This is Ambassador Reed. All Earth ships in the area. Implement Protocol 7. Dax laughed. Your tiny vessels should stay hidden. Ambassador, we wouldn't want any accidents. The chamber's screens suddenly shifted. New signals were coming in. Dozens of them. Small, fast-moving dots appeared on the tactical display. Earth ships emerging from their hidden positions. This is Captain Baker of the Earth ship Swift, a calm voice announced. Beginning evacuation procedures. All civilian ships, follow our guidance signals. We'll get you out. The council members watched in surprise as Earth's fleet moved with incredible speed. The ships were indeed small, barely visible next to the Arkan warships, but they darted between the massive vessels like fish around sleeping whales, their speed and maneuverability unlike anything the council had seen before. Arkan Command, this is your final warning. Baker's voice was cold now. Cease fire on civilian targets, or we will respond. Dax's laughter boomed through the chamber. You dare threaten the Arkan fleet? Our smallest ship could crush your entire. His words cut off as new alarms blared. On the main screen, one of the massive Arkan ships suddenly spun out of formation, its engines flickering. What's happening? Dax demanded. Sir, an Arkan officer's panicked voice filled the chamber. The human ships. They're too fast. We can't target them. They're hitting our engine control systems. The council watched in amazement as the tiny Earth ships demonstrated their true capabilities. They moved in perfect coordination, striking with surgical precision. Their small size made them nearly impossible for the huge Arkan weapons to track, and their advanced shields, designed specifically for their compact frames, could shrug off hits that did connect. This is impossible. Dax roared. They're nothing. They're insects. Reed stood slowly, his eyes fixed on the tactical display. No, Commander. We're just efficient. You built your ships to show power. We built ours to win fights. As if to emphasize his words, another Arkan warship went dark, its massive bulk now helpless in space. The Earth ships continued their work, protecting civilian transports while systematically neutralizing the Arkan threat. The galaxy was getting its first real look at human military doctrine. They wouldn't forget it. The Galactic Council held an emergency session 2 days after the Ring Colony's battle. This time, no one was laughing at the human ships. On the main display, technical readouts from the battle played in high detail. The council members leaned forward, watching Earth's vessels perform maneuvers that should have been impossible. The ships moved like dancers, their formations tight and precise. I don't understand, one council member said. How can they turn so quickly? Ambassador Reed stepped up to the podium. Simple physics, he explained. Our ships are smaller, so they need less energy to change direction. Think of a large rock versus a small one, which is easier to throw. The chamber buzzed with conversation. On the screen, footage showed an Earth ship dodging a massive Arkan energy blast, then spinning on its axis to launch a precise counterstrike. Captain Baker stood beside Reed, pointing to specific details. Our engines are proportionally more powerful because they're pushing less mass, and our shield systems. He smiled. Well, it's easier to protect a smaller area perfectly than a large area poorly. The footage shifted to show a formation of 10 human ships attacking an Arkan dreadnought. They moved in perfect sync, like wolves hunting larger prey. "We call it pack tactics," Baker explained. "The Arkans built their ships to fight one-on-one battles. But we never fight alone." On screen, the human ships struck from multiple angles. Their weapons weren't as powerful as the Arkan guns, but they didn't need to be. They targeted specific systems, engines, weapons, sensors, with surgical precision. "Look at their coordination," an alien admiral muttered. "It's like they share one mind." Reed nodded. "Our ships use advanced AI systems to coordinate their movements. Bigger ships have longer communication delays between their parts. Our vessels can react instantly." The display showed a new angle of the battle. An Arkan blast that should have destroyed a human ship somehow passed right through it. "Holographic projectors," Baker said proudly. "The Arkans thought size meant we couldn't fit advanced systems in our ships. Actually, the opposite is true. Smaller ships need less power to run complex equipment. We can pack more technology into our vessels because they're compact." A new set of scans appeared, showing the internal layout of a human ship. The council members murmured in surprise at the density of systems packed into the small frame. "Every cubic meter counts," Reed explained. "We can't waste space on grand corridors or decorative chambers like the Arkans do. Our ships are tools, not statements of power." The footage returned to the battle, showing the final moments. The human ships moved in perfect formation, disabling the massive Arkan vessels without destroying them. "You could have killed their crews," one council member noted. "Why didn't you?" "Because we're not bullies," Reed replied firmly. "We don't need to prove our strength through destruction. The Arkans survived to learn from their mistake. That was the point." Baker pulled up one final image, a size comparison between fleets. The Arkan ships loomed like mountains next to the human vessels. But now everyone saw those smaller ships differently. "There's an old Earth saying," Reed said quietly. "It's not the size of the dog in the fight. It's the size of the fight in the dog." The council chamber remained silent, processing everything they'd learned. The galaxy's understanding of space warfare had just changed forever. Somewhere in the distance, they could hear Lord Commander Dax shouting orders to redesign the entire Arkan fleet. But it was too late. The era of massive warships was ending. The future belonged to those who understood that bigger wasn't always better. 1 week after the Ring Colonies battle, humanity launched its response. The Arkan Empire was about to learn why you should never corner a species that had spent its entire history fighting against bigger opponents. Captain Baker stood on the bridge of the Swift, watching his tactical display. Around him, 50 human ships moved in perfect formation. To an Arkan observer, they might have looked like a swarm of insects compared to their massive battleships. But these insects had teeth. "All ships report ready," his communications officer announced. "Wolfpack's Alpha through Echo standing by." Baker nodded. "Send the message to Ambassador Reed. Operation Thunderbolt is go." Across Arkan space, alerts began blaring. Human ships seemed to appear from nowhere, their advanced stealth systems making them virtually invisible until they chose to be seen. They struck with devastating precision at key military installations. At the massive Arkan shipyards orbiting their colony world, alarms screamed as sensors detected incoming vessels. The defense commander laughed when he saw their size. "Only 10 small ships," he sneered, launched the defense fleet. 5 enormous Arkan warships moved to intercept the human vessels. Their huge weapons powered up, ready to swat these annoying insects from space. That's when the trap was sprung. "Wolfpack formations, execute Maneuver Delta," Baker ordered across the fleet network. The human ships suddenly split apart, each group of 5 taking on one Arkan vessel. Their movements were perfectly coordinated, years of training showing in every action. The Arkan ships fired their massive weapons, but the human vessels were too quick. They darted between the energy beams like dancers, their smaller size making them nearly impossible to hit. And with each pass, they struck critical systems on the larger ships. "Sir," an Arkan officer shouted, "they're targeting our shield generators. How do they know exactly where to hit?" The answer was simple: preparation. While the Arkans had been laughing at Earth's small ships, humanity had been studying every weakness in Arkan vessel design. In orbit around another Arkan world, a different battle played out. This time, 20 human ships faced 3 massive Arkan dreadnoughts. The size difference was almost comical. Each dreadnought was larger than all 20 human ships combined. But size didn't matter when you couldn't hit your target. The human ships moved in complex patterns, confusing Arkan targeting systems. Their own weapons might have been smaller, but they struck with surgical precision. Engines, weapons, and communications arrays went dark under their coordinated assault. "This is impossible." An Arkan commander raged as his mighty ship systems failed one by one. "They're nothing but tiny toys." "Size isn't everything," came the calm reply from the human fleet. "Quality beats quantity." Back at the shipyards, Baker's fleet had disabled the entire defense force without destroying a single ship. The human vessels regrouped, their formation tight and professional. "Send the message," Baker ordered. Across all Arkan frequencies, a simple transmission played. "This is Captain Baker of the Earth Fleet. Your ships are disabled, but your crews are safe. Remember this lesson. The biggest ship doesn't always win the fight." In the Galactic Council chamber, Ambassador Reed watched the reports flood in. Across Arkan space, their mighty fleets were being systematically disabled by ships they had once mocked as too small to matter. Perhaps, Reed suggested to the stunned council members, "It's time to discuss new rules about military aggression in our shared space." The council quickly agreed. After all, they had just watched humanity's tiny fleet crush the most powerful military force in known space. Sometimes, the best things really did come in small packages. The Galactic Council called an emergency session as reports of Arkan defeats poured in from across the galaxy. But this time, they weren't gathering to discuss battle tactics. Today, humanity would reveal the true secret of their success. Ambassador Reed stood at the center of the chamber, surrounded by holographic displays showing the internal workings of Earth's ships. Behind him, Captain Baker operated the controls, zooming in on specific systems. "The real advantage of our ships isn't just their size," Reed explained. "It's their ability to change." The display showed a human vessel splitting apart, its sections reorganizing themselves like a complex puzzle. The council members watched in amazement as the ship transformed from a combat configuration to a rescue vessel in minutes. "Modular design," Baker said proudly. "Every ship in our fleet can be reconfigured for different missions. We don't need specialized vessels because each ship can become what we need it to be." On the screen, another demonstration played. A small squadron of Earth ships approached what looked like a repair station. As they docked, robotic systems quickly removed and replaced entire sections of their hulls. 10 minutes, Reed announced. That's how long it takes to completely refit a ship for a new mission. The Arkans need weeks in space dock to make even minor changes to their vessels. An alien admiral leaned forward, his 4 eyes wide. "But the power requirements for such systems," Baker smiled, "are actually lower than maintaining the massive engines the Arkans use. Our ships are light, efficient, and adaptable. We can carry spare modules and small support vessels, allowing us to change tactics in the middle of a battle." The display shifted to show footage from recent battles. Earth ships suddenly transformed their weapon configurations, confusing Arkan targeting systems. Others changed their engine layouts to perform maneuvers that should have been impossible. "We learned long ago that survival depends on adaptation," Reed continued. "The Arkans built their fleet like a hammer, big, powerful, and only good for one thing. We built ours like a Swiss Army knife." Several council members looked confused at the reference. Reed clarified. an old Earth tool that contained many tools in one small package. The chamber's main screen now showed a real-time feed from the front lines. Earth ships were helping repair the disabled Arkan vessels, their modular systems allowing them to quickly transform into repair craft. Even now, we're not just fighting, Baker pointed out. Our ships are also providing aid, conducting repairs, and maintaining communications. Each vessel can perform any role we need. An Arkan representative, recently arrived to replace the disgraced Lord Commander Dax, spoke up. This technology, it changes everything about space warfare. That's the point, Reed replied. The age of massive, single-purpose warships is over. The future belongs to adaptability and efficiency. The display showed one final image. A new class of Earth ship, even smaller than their current vessels, but packed with even more modular systems. We're sharing this technology with the Council, Reed announced, under one condition. It can only be used for vessels under 1 kilometer in length. Bigger ships can't utilize these systems effectively anyway. The Council erupted in excited discussion. Everyone could see the implications. The Arkan Empire's mighty fleet, once the terror of the galaxy, was now obsolete. Their huge ships, once symbols of power, were now just massive targets that couldn't adapt to the new reality of space warfare. In the back of the chamber, Captain Baker watched the reactions with satisfaction. Think they finally understand why we built small, he whispered to Reed. The ambassador nodded. Size matters, he said quietly, but not the way they thought it did. The galaxy would never be the same. The era of the giants was over, and the future belonged to those who understood that true strength lay in adaptation, not intimidation. The Arkan homeworld's orbital space bustled with activity as the combined fleet of Earth and allied species gathered for the final confrontation. But this wasn't going to be another battle. This was going to be a demonstration. Ambassador Reed stood on the bridge of the Swift beside Captain Baker, watching as the last remnants of the once mighty Arkan fleet faced them. 5 massive dreadnoughts, each one nearly 3 kilometers long, represented the Empire's final show of force. They still don't get it, do they? Baker asked quietly. Reed shook his head. Some lessons have to be learned the hard way. The Arkan ships moved into attack formation, their huge weapons charging up. On Earth's side, 100 small vessels, none longer than 300 meters, arranged themselves in their now famous wolf pack formations. This is your final warning. The Arkan admiral's voice boomed across all channels. Withdraw now, or face destruction. Baker looked at Reed, who nodded. Show them, the ambassador said simply. What followed wasn't really a battle. It was more like a dance. The human ships moved in perfect coordination, their modular systems adapting in real time. As the Arkans fired their massive weapons, the Earth vessels transformed their configurations, their hulls shifting to present minimal target profiles. Impossible, the Arkan admiral shouted as his shots missed again and again. Nothing can move like that. Actually, Baker replied calmly, anything can move like that, if it's the right size. The human ships demonstrated every lesson they'd learned in their long history of warfare. They showed how smaller, agile vessels could run circles around larger ones. They proved that adaptability beat raw power every time. Within 15 minutes, all 5 Arkan dreadnoughts were dead in space, their systems disabled by precise strikes from vessels they could barely even target. Now, Reed broadcast to all ships, watch this. The human fleet regrouped, then began to change. Ships that moments ago had been combat vessels transformed into repair craft. Others became medical ships or rescue vessels. In less than 10 minutes, the entire fleet had shifted from a combat force to a humanitarian one. As the stunned Arkans watched, Earth's ships approached their disabled vessels, not to destroy them, but to help them. This is how strength should be used, Reed announced to the watching galaxy. The Galactic Council had arranged for this demonstration to be broadcast everywhere. Not to dominate, but to help. Not to destroy, but to build. In the following hours, the human fleet helped repair the Arkan ships, but with one major modification: installing the new modular systems that would allow them to be refitted as smaller, more efficient vessels. The Arkan admiral, watching from his powerless flagship, finally understood. "All this time," he said quietly, "we thought bigger meant better. We were so wrong." 1 week later, the Galactic Council met to sign the new peace accords. The terms were simple. No more ships over 1 kilometer in length could be built for military purposes. The age of the giant warships was officially over. Ambassador Reed stood at the podium one last time, looking out at the races that had once mocked Earth's tiny fleet. "Today marks a new beginning," he said. "We came to the stars hoping to find friends, not enemies. We built our ships small not because we had to, but because we chose to. Efficiency over intimidation. Adaptation over overwhelming force. These aren't just design choices, they're principles to live by." He gestured to the window, where ships of all species could be seen testing their new modular systems, learning to think differently about space travel and warfare. "Remember this," Reed concluded, "the next time you're tempted to judge something by its size. The greatest power often comes in the smallest packages. After all," he smiled, "humanity proved that, didn't we?" The chamber erupted in applause, not the mocking laughter of the past, but genuine respect. The galaxy had learned its lesson. Sometimes, the smallest forces could create the biggest changes.